Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a fantastic day. My name is Kmart, and I want to talk about some basketball. And today, we are going to be talking about the Oklahoma City Thunder and a little bit of a problem that the Thunder have unfortunately sort of created for themselves in this off season. So, we're just going to sort of get right down to the root of the issue here, and the issue for the Thunder is that they've got too many players on their roster right now. As of sometime last week, I think it was, they now have 21 players who are either signed to their roster or will be signed in the coming days because I think there's still two or three deals that are being finalized. But the fact of the matter is that they've got 21 players on their roster. That is the absolute limit that you're allowed to have in the off season, and by the time you get to the regular season and start actually playing games that count, they're going to have to cut that down a little bit. They're going to have to go from 21 to I believe 15 is the limit for the active roster in the regular season. So you've got some guys that you need to get rid of. The Thunder had already sort of taken a step in that direction. Last week they waived Rudy Gay. The problem is they waived Rudy Gay and then immediately signed someone else. I think it was Jack White from the Nuggets that they signed. So they didn't really do themselves any favors there. They made a spot and then they immediately filled it with another guy. But long story short, the Thunder have too many people and they're going to have to get rid of some of them. So if we look at it from that perspective, the most obvious question here is who do the Thunder look to actually get rid of, right? You need to clear 5 or 6 spots by the time the regular season starts. So, well, if we're looking up and down the Thunder lineup, we start looking at maybe some early selection criteria for players that you can get rid of, but that isn't an easy thing to do either. Um, the Thunder don't really have any significant money issues with this lineup. The 21 guys that they've got um, signed at the moment, whose contracts we know about, does put them slightly over the cap by like 5 million or so, but they're nowhere near the luxury tax threshold, right? Tens of millions of dollars away from that luxury tax. So effectively, any combination of guys that you end up trading or cutting or whatever means you have at your disposal to get them off of your lineup would basically bring you under the cap. If you have to cut 5 or 6 guys, they're only about 5 million over the salary cap. So all of that is to say that the cost of a player's contract, really is not a significant concern here in terms of whether or not you're considering trading or cutting that player. At least from my perspective. Obviously, I am not in the Oklahoma City Thunder's front office, so the money could be a factor um, for the actual people who will be making these decisions. But just looking at it from their cap standpoint, it doesn't necessarily have to be a concern how much that player's getting paid. So we can kind of push that one away as a criteria right off the bat. The next one you would move to is maybe aging veterans, right? Guys who are maybe too old to contribute anymore, or guys who are older but sort of serve as that sort of veteran presence that you could maybe dangle in a trade, right? Send him to another, maybe more competitive team where they'd have a chance. But the Thunder don't have too many of those guys either. Only 5 of the 21 players on their roster are 25 years old or older, right? And there are very few of those sort of aging veteran guys on the Oklahoma City Thunder because they've designed it that way. This team was kind of sort of tanking for a little while or close to tanking, so their focus was not on aging veterans or help from guys 30 and over. They were mostly looking for young players that they could develop who had potential, and now they have too many of those guys, unfortunately. So you don't have too many of those players. The only real guy who comes to mind as that immediate sort of older player that you might look to get rid of is the one that they recently acquired, which is Davis Bertans. They picked him up in a draft day trade from the Dallas Mavericks. That was the move that allowed the Thunder to go from 12 to 10 and pick up Cason Wallace. So that's a guy that you could maybe move here, right? He's got experience in the league, but his numbers weren't fantastic. Of course, the exact same sort of profile that made it easy for the Thunder to pick him up in a salary dump and kind of do the Mavericks a favor might make it difficult for them to find another trade partner to take him, right? They were already kind of the team taking Bertans just because they could afford to absorb his contract, so moving him may not be all that easy. So, yeah, you don't have too many aging guys. So now let's move on to one final bit of criteria, I guess, if we're looking for players to cut, or trade, rather. That is still an option here. But expiring contracts, right? That would be the third major one. If you can't move, veteran experience, if you don't have a massive glaring black hole of a contract that you're trying to get rid of, then you would look to guys on expiring deals, guys in the last sort of year of their contract. They do have some of those guys. In particular, they've got two, Victor Oladipo, who they recently acquired via trade, and Alexei Pokusevsky, I think is how you pronounce that, hopefully. But they're both in the final year of their deal, so they could be candidates there. Then you look at guys who aren't currently on expiring contracts, but could be, if that makes sense, and I'll explain in just a second. Because the Thunder have 10 players on their roster right now who have team options for the next season. So if the Thunder have no intentions of picking up some of those options, then any of those 10 guys would effectively be in the final year of their contract because the team option is not going to get picked up. So there's a little bit of criteria, right? Oh, looking for expiring contracts. Well, they have a lot, but at this point, you almost have too many, right? 2 guys are on the final year of their contract. 10 more guys could be if their team options were declined. So that is viable, but you still have to narrow down a pool of 12 potential players. So it's helpful, but not massively so. So at this point, if we're looking at the Thunder lineup, it might be a little bit easier to start with the players who are least likely to be traded. And maybe that helps us narrow it down to the ones who might be, right? So I took a look at the lineup for the Thunder and put them sort of into some general categories, right? Obviously, I'm not an expert in the Thunder's lineup, did not get to see a whole lot of their games because for the most part, until the back end of the season, we weren't sure what their trajectory was, right? There were some rumblings that they were kind of going to be on the lower end and kind of going to be tanking, and then they turn things around the halfway point. They realize, hey, we have a shot at this. So, like I said, not an expert, but just from what I saw and what we can see from the stats, this is what I got. The first category we've got for the Thunder is just straight up untouchable players. These guys are not going to be moved, full stop, right? And that is guys like Shea. SGA is the clear star player here. He is not going to be moved. Chet Holmgren is not going anywhere, right? They waited a whole damn year for him to be healthy, and they're very excited about just those 2 games he played in Summer League. He's not going anywhere. And obviously the third one is Cason Wallace, the guy that they just picked up, the guy that just used the 10th overall pick on in this previous draft. They're not immediately moving him. If they were going to move him, they would have done it back on draft night, not in the back end of July. So those 3 guys, as close to untouchable as you're going to get here for the Thunder. Now we move on to the next section, which is guys that I feel are mostly safe. Not 100%, they're not untouchable like the previous section, but guys that I don't think the Thunder are going to want to get rid of, right? And the first 2 of those guys are Josh Giddey and Lu Dort, right? They're both coming off of some pretty solid seasons. They didn't necessarily massively light up the scoreboard here. It's kind of hard to do that when SGA was going out and averaging just like 30 plus points a night, but they did well. They played relatively efficiently. They continued to develop, and at least in Lu Dort's case, they recently, I think, signed him to not a big contract, but a significant one. It's like 16, 17 million, somewhere in that sort of range. So they obviously saw his potential and rewarded him for it. So I don't think that they're going to be likely to immediately bail out of that. So guys like Gideon Lou Dort are probably safe. Guys like Jalen Williams, or there's two Jalen Williams on the Thunder. Jalen, that Jalen. He'll be up on the screen somewhere. Um, he had a pretty solid rookie campaign here, right? 14.1 points, 4.5 rebounds, 3.3 assists. As a rookie, he played all but 7 games here for the Thunder, so they definitely liked what they saw from him. Not really a guy that I think that they want to move on from right away after playing his first season. And then the last guy in the mostly safe category, I would say, is Isaiah Jones. Uh, Still a young player. This was his first season in Oklahoma City after leaving Philadelphia. He spent, I think, his first 2 years with the 76ers. But in his one season with OKC, he was able to get more minutes than he ever got in Philly, and he was able to improve his points per game, rebounds per game, assists per game, field goal percentage, and 3-point percentage in that one season. So the Thunder gave him a bigger role, and he absolutely took advantage of it. I think the Thunder would want to see more from him in the future. And by more, I just mean they want to keep him, not that he somehow disappointed expectations, improving just about every statistical average that he could. So him and Jalen Williams are two guys still very young who sort of showed out last season that I think the Thunder would want to hold on to. So honestly, that kind of does it for the sections of people who I felt were safe. Now we get into more questionable territory. And the guys in this section are mostly here because of depth concerns. Right, so we'll start with the first group. It's that sort of forward center kind of stable for them. Guys like Kenrich Williams, Alexei Pokusevski, as I mentioned before, Osman Dieng. That's our first little group here. That trio saw some decent time last season. Williams and Pokusevski both played about 20 minutes per game last season. Dieng had about 15 minutes per game. So were they massive parts of the rotation? No, but they saw relatively decent time on the floor for a team that was, for a lot of the season, not doing spectacularly. However, their statistical profiles, for all three of them really, were not the most impressive. Not bad, but not really great either, right? But now you have to factor in the fact that Chet Holmgren is returning, that he's healthy. He is going to be presumably the starter and one of the focal points for this roster on both ends of the floor. So you've got three guys there who all sort of fill the same role that one guy in Holmgren could potentially sort of handle all by himself. So theoretically speaking, all of these guys could remain with the team. But if they do so, I can't help feeling like their minutes and their role on the team is going to be kind of diminished, right? If Chet Holmgren is eating up most of the time as the starter, most of the time on the floor in general, and perhaps most importantly, most of the opportunities in terms of having the ball in his hands, I'm not sure you need all three of these other guys here to back him up. So maybe one or two of those three players that I mentioned get moved just because they don't need the depth anymore. And that's the exact same thought process for the other group. We move on from the centers to sort of the guard position. The Thunder have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. They've got Lou Dort. They've got Jalen Williams. They've got now Cason Wallace coming in. And Isaiah Jones, as I mentioned, is another guy that they might want to sort of keep and hold on to. If all of those guys stay, then the Thunder get a little bit crowded at the guard position, right? And that might not be good news for guys like Aaron Wiggins, and Tre Mann, guys who I think technically Wiggins is listed as a 2, Tre Mann's listed as a 1, but more and more in the NBA, your exact positioning, right, being a 1 or a 2 as opposed to just being a guard in general, those lines sort of start to blur here. And it feels like if the Thunder are going to keep all those guys that I mentioned, right, SGA, Dort, Williams, Wallace, Isaiah Jones. Do you need both of Wiggins and Mann? Maybe you keep one of them, just, to have depth and to continue developing guys who are still pretty young. But if you're looking to cut spots, I think that's a place you could look, just like what we mentioned with those three big men. If you need to slim down the roster, you've got guys who are going to see fewer minutes next season because of the guys on your roster already and the guys that you drafted. So one or both of Wiggins and Mann could potentially be on the way out if the Thunder needed more space. So that was the section of questionable people, guys who may lose their spot because of depth. But there is still one more section here, and that last section is the ones who I just think are the most likely to be cut, right? It's not a depth issue, it's just they're not needed, right? And first and foremost in that category is a guy we already talked about. That's Davis Bertans. I don't think that they really need him. They pick him up on draft day so that they can move up a couple of spots from 12 to 10. But I'm honestly not really sure that they actually want Bertans in their lineup. His numbers have not been great recently, and he is certainly capable of bouncing back, right? You look at his profile statistically over the entirety of his career. We know that he's capable of still being that sort of threat, of being that stretch 4, stretch 5, I guess, that he was in the past. But if you're the Thunder, you're almost certainly more likely to opt to put faith in one of your younger prospects, and also a guy who's making significantly less money than Bertans, who's on like a $16 million contract. You're probably going to be looking to one of your young developing players instead of giving Bertans his second or third chance to sort of make his comeback here. So, as I mentioned before, finding a trade partner might be a little bit rough for him, but they could move him. They could also just cut him. But that's one of the guys that I think is most likely to go. The second guy is Victor Oladipo, which I know it's a little bit unfortunate, and they do trade for him. But just like Bertans, this felt like a situation where the Thunder traded for a player because they could afford to absorb the costs, and they sort of got the assets, or got some assets for it, as opposed to going out and getting a guy that they genuinely wanted, right? And for Oladipo, it's not a drop-off in his statistics like it was for Bertans. It's just the fact that the man has been plagued by injuries for quite some time here. Last season was the first time since the 18-19 season that Victor Oladipo played more than half of the season. And that does sound impressive, but even that's really just a technicality. I say that he played more than half the season. He played 42 of a possible 82 games. So, yes, he played more than half the season, but only by the barest technicality of playing 42, right? That's still barely over the halfway mark, and it's still not a great amount for a team looking for contributions across the entirety of the season. Oladipo has played 138 games in total in the last 5 seasons as well. So 1.5 seasons worth of games over the last 5 years. And obviously that's not his fault, right? Oladipo has gotten hurt. And maybe you could liken it a little bit to sort of that Derrick Rose situation where his play style might not help with him staying healthy. But at a certain point, it can't all be that, right? At a certain point for Oladipo, you just are a little bit unlucky. But that's the problem, right? We know what he can or could do when he is or was healthy, but the Thunder need space. They've got to cut guys, and you've got plenty of guys in their first 2 to 3 seasons right now. And I think if you're the Thunder, you would be better served trying to develop those young players instead of waiting to see if Oladipo ever gets back to 100%. So I don't want the whole league to give up on Oladipo coming back and being healthy, but I don't think the Thunder are the team to help facilitate that, considering the fact that they need to free up roster spots. So Oladipo very likely to go, and then we're just going to sort of wrap this up here. We've got a whole group of guys that I think could be moved here. So We'll just kind of go through them rapid fire here. We've got Usman Garuba, Ty Ty Washington Jr., Jeremiah Robinson Earl, Jack White, and Jalen Williams. The other Jalen Williams, Jaylin, as opposed to the other Jalen. But these are all relatively young guys, right? So you would think, yeah, you know, they're young, they're developing, they've got potential. Why would you get rid of them? Well, first and foremost, again, the whole point of this video, the Thunder need to clear up roster spots, right? So these guys are all young, but they didn't really light up their stat sheet much. They didn't really make crazy contributions. They went in, they played their minutes, and they played solidly, but right now it seems like all of these guys are guys who have potential, but very few of them are probably going to contribute immediately in the way that the Thunder might be hoping for. So if you have another 1, 2, 3 years, then maybe there's a diamond in the rough in one of the guys in this list. But you've already got a lot of young guys. You've already got a lot of developing players who you're hoping to get stuff from, and you need to clear up 5 to 6 roster spots. So if you're the Thunder, someone's potential is going to have to be ignored here, right? All the guys that I mentioned could end up being solid contributors. Some of them could end up being star players, 3, 5 years from now. Who knows? But at a certain point, you can't just hoard literally everyone in case one of them ends up turning into a star player. You can only hold so many guys, right? So those are the ones that I think get cut the most to sort of underpin this. I know that we were sort of going from least likely to be traded all the way down, but this bottom section is where I think most of the cuts or trade fodder, if the Thunder look to go in that direction, will come from. And then they simply hold on to all the guys that I talked about in the previous sections. So, yeah, the Thunder have some decisions to make here. Again, I don't know whether it's going to be via trade or if they're just going to cut players from the roster, but they've got 21 on the roster now. I think it does need to get down to, I do believe the number is 15 by the start of the regular season. So a lot of guys are going to end up being a little disappointed here and end up getting moved in some way. But the good news for them is that a lot of the other teams in the league are probably watching this scenario very, very closely, because the Thunder, by virtue of necessity, are going to have to cut very cheap guys who probably still have potential, right? Garuba, Washington Jr., Robinson Earl, Jack White, Jalen Williams, right? They're all in their first or their second or first 3 years, I guess. We'll just sort of wrap that whole group up there. So if you're one of the other teams in the league and you've got a spot or two, you're looking for someone for cheap, a young player, someone with potential who hasn't developed yet, the Thunder are about to let 4, 5, 6 of those types of player go because they have to clear up roster space. So that would be the hope here, that any of these guys that the Thunder let go of immediately find spots on other teams who are just looking for a cheap prospect. So that is the problem here for the Thunder. To really just sort of wrap things up, they went for the strategy of building assets, right? When it became clear that they were sort of shutting this down, that they traded Paul George away and that they were going into a full-on rebuild, they went all in to try and acquire as many draft picks, trade exceptions, pick swaps, the whole shebang. But they also went out and got as many young, talented, potential players that they could. And now you have to sort of prune that a little bit. You ended up sort of casting your net a little bit too wide. So now the Thunder have to cut it down. But yeah, not really a headline that we see all that often, that a team has too many guys, that they've got too much talent, too much potential here. But the Thunder have managed to do it. So we shall see what their roster looks like come opening night. But those are just sort of my thoughts on maybe who gets moved from them, who they could look to get rid of. Obviously, I am not a huge Thunder fan, and I don't know the roster inside and out here. So if you're someone who does, please let me know what you think. Was I way off base? Have I completely misjudged the scenario with one or two of these guys? Am I overvaluing someone? Am I undervaluing? some of those guys that I put in that bottom category, please let me know. Because like I said, I do not really know too much about the Thunder lineup outside of the first handful of guys in their roster. So let me know what you think. Who's going to get moved? Who should the team hold on to? Do you think that they simply cut players, or is there a trade on the horizon here for Oklahoma City? Please feel free to share your thoughts with me. But other than that, thank you all so much for watching, and I will talk to you later.